Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Mark C. Crowley. I'll tell you all about Mark in just a moment. Grace Under Pressure is that show that deals with what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment we exert toward others. And when you do it as a leader, as you will very much discover that Mark is, you do it with the purpose of bringing people together for common cause and creating great results where people want to go to work. Welcome, Mark C. Crowley. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today, sir.
Thank you so very much, John. It's a pleasure. Mine, great pleasure.
Great. Mark has spent 25 years as an executive in financial services. Tough business, but he did very, very well. And he's been an SVP and national sales manager and dealt with people at all levels. He's a regular contributor to Fast Company and has had his work appear in Huffington Post, USA Today, Forbes, you name it, he's been in there. He's a member, like me, of 100 Coaches. It's a very special group of executive coaches and executives and people from many walks of life who gather together to make our world better. Mark's newest book is the second edition of Lead from the Heart. And it's an exciting concept, and Mark is going to share it with us. Welcome, Mark. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Great. Okay. Lead from the Heart was first published, a decade ago. You have revisited it. What prompted that, Mark?
John, there are a lot of reasons why I revisited it, but when I wrote the book originally, I knew that there would be some resistance to the title alone. We were not ready for heart in leadership 11 years ago when the book came out. And there truly was a lot of resistance, so much so that a consultant that I hired to help me, I'm coming out of a corporate environment. I have no background. No one knows who I am, no platform. And so I hired this woman to help me strategize on how to do it. And her advice to me was, under no circumstances do I call the book Lead from the Heart. Like, you ditch that as fast as possible. You're going to effing fail, and she used the full language. And it was really sort of a stunning blow to what I wanted to convey. And I had to come to the conclusion that what I was saying was truth, and I'm going to wait for the world to come to me. And so my strategy was, okay, if you're going to resist this idea, then I'm going to start writing articles so that people could see or read and hear and say, oh, well, that's not as crazy as I thought. That's not as soft as I thought. That's not as woo-woo as I thought. And then, as you know, I started a podcast so that people could actually hear me and go, oh, he's not a religious nut. He gets business. And so I think the world has been moving in this direction. But the truth is, no matter how hard I tried, what happened in the last 2 years is what has opened minds and hearts and consciousness to the idea that, wait a minute, the way to most successfully and effectively manage people is to start by caring deeply about them and to demonstrate that to them on the most consistent, intentional basis as possible. And from there, you can elevate your expectations of performance. But really, the answer to your question is, the moment is now. We've finally accepted that, this isn't such a crazy idea after all.
I'm totally with you, because we were introduced by Derek Sweeney of the Sweeney Agency, or at least he told me you should connect with Mark. And because he said you and I had similar ideas. And of course, my focus on grace, which is akin to what you do. And of course, and when my first book on grace came out in 2019, it was not a sales success, but now the concept of grace, but I don't have the discipline to rewrite the book. So I came up with a new approach to it, which will come out next year. But very much so, the times have challenged us to, people want leaders who they feel are authentic and they, as you say, lead from the heart. So what does it mean to lead from the heart, Mark?
Well, it really starts with the fundamental assessment that human beings thrive when somebody is supporting them, making them feel safe, making them feel valued, mattered, appreciated, somebody that is going to be their advocate rather than their competitor. And so all of those that I just listed are essentially things that we don't naturally do in workplace management. One of the chief complaints from workers is that they actually compete for recognition, for bonuses, for any attention, any compensation, upgrades with the very people that they're managing for. So interestingly, you and I had an exchange in the last few days on Twitter. If we reorient managers into coaches, it automatically makes them advocates. It automatically makes them someone that says, I want to help this person get better so that they can perform on the field. The coach doesn't go onto the field to kick the field goals or throw the final touchdown. They're letting those people do that. So it's an orientation difference, but it really starts with an understanding that we have always believed that the heart is just a magnificent blood pump, and that our cognitive ability is only in our minds. And so we have intentionally hired the smartest people we could possibly find. Like, that was the common denominator of people that we put into management roles. He or she is really smart. They're going to make a good manager. Well, it ignores that the heart has its own intelligence, which we can get into. But if you understand that human beings are fundamentally designed to have two forms of intelligence, the heart and the mind, and we're only leveraging one of them, well, guess what? The mind is what will say, hey, we hired somebody really great, but we're not going to hit our quarterly numbers, so we should probably let them go so that we can save the money. Instead, where the heart might come in and say, well, wait a minute, if you hired the right person, if you go to them and you say, we're struggling, we're not hitting our revenue numbers, we're worried about what's going to happen, can you help us? Can you do something that could basically help the organization get where we need to get to so that you can stay here because we value you enough? Let's think long term. So there's a whole bias difference. The mind tells us to do a lot of really bad things where the heart can keep us from doing it, is really what it comes down to.
I remember in the previous, because you're a two-time guest for this. So,
thank you for that.
A phrase that has stuck with me, and I know you've done some clinical research, if I say so. Why do you refer to the heart as the little brain? Well,
I don't actually. This came from science. So backing up, what happened for me was that a friend of mine challenged me. The original book, the original book was intentionally going to be 4 different practices that I learned that if you aggregated, if you did them really consistently, that you could have an enormous impact on people. And an impact in the sense of high engagement, loyalty, extraordinary productivity, all of the things that managers want. But a friend of mine said to me, you're going to have to explain why that works. And I had not given that a moment of thought. So I literally spent an extra year going out and looking for the evidence to support my thesis. But I didn't have the thesis at that moment. I had 4 practices. What he helped me to do, John, was to congeal an understanding that what I had done with people for all of my career was to affect them in their hearts. And that sounds really good until you present that to a CEO and you're like, I don't want any part of that. That's ridiculous. And so I literally told my wife, I've wasted 10 months of my life, because even the people that I used to work with, when they hear a lead from the heart, they're just going to go, there's something wrong with this guy, And so, but she said to me, didn't you prove it already? Like, don't you already know it's true? And so from there, what I found was science that, for 300 years, we believed that the heart was just a pump because we had no way of detecting any form of intelligence in it. They opened up the heart, they saw the bump to bump to bump, and they went, that's a pump. And this is everything up here. And so until you can prove otherwise, that's what we're going to believe. So we've always believed that we're just mind driven. So there is science now that is emerging that is showing that the heart actually has its own mini brain, if you will, that it makes choices and decisions on its own. It's really interesting that, by the way, that the heart is formed in an embryo before the brain. So it's almost as if nature said, we want the heart to be in charge of this, not the other way around. But that's not the way humans, isn't that fascinating? So, but basically, I went and met with a world-class cardiologist and I said, I just need some confirmation here. is there any science that will prove that what I was doing was affecting the heart, or did I just make this up? And she just said, "You've figured out something. We're just figuring out ourselves in medicine." And from there, she introduced me. She said, "I really want you to get the science on this." So she introduced me to an organization that is much more familiar now to some people, called the Institute of Heart Math. And they're in Northern California. And for the last 30 years, John, they have been studying the intelligence of the heart. Like, they believed it was there, so they've been dedicated to that. One of the founders mentored me in writing the first edition. The second edition, I had the head of research help me and give me all the research that they've done. But basically what they've confirmed is that the heart and the mind operate together. They're sending signals back and forth. So you're having a feeling about how this conversation's going. Mark is a good guy. That makes me happy. Mark's not a good guest. I got to shut him off. Whatever's happening, the feeling starts first, not the thought. And so from there, what he has discovered, and by the way, the second edition of the book has all of this research from books that just came out this year that reconfirm this, that when the heart and the mind are working together. So I create an environment for you as my employee where you're feeling safe and appreciated and valued and mattered. That you feel you're growing, you're an essential part of my team. I'm feeding you with positive emotions. And guess what? We're hardwired to thrive on that. We are built as human beings to thrive on them, and we don't thrive when we don't have them. So when you're marinating in all these positive emotions, he says what it does is it creates what he calls coherence. The signals that are going back and forth between the heart and the mind create optimal human performance. So his name is Dr. Roland McCready. And what he told me was, he goes, everything that you did as a manager, whether you realized what you were doing or not, it couldn't have been anything better for human performance. So when you make people feel safe and valued and mattered and all the things that I'm describing here, you're creating this massive positivity inside the human body, in the human spirit on top of it, that makes people want to reciprocate and do extraordinary work.
Well, I think that's it. As you're explaining this to me, I am thinking of the work of Amy Edmondson, of course, in psychological safety. And I think what you're emphasizing is that the origin of psychological safety begins with us as the leader, of course, to create those conditions and our behavior. Am I on the right track, Mark?
You are. And interestingly, one of the best endorsements that I got from this book was from Amy, and she's Amy C. Edmondson. She really, she likes to see, just like I do, is the definition. But I'll tell you an interesting story that I've never told before, because psychological safety, if you go back to the pyramid that Maslow had, the safety is a basic need for human beings. And we've never really thought about it in terms of being like this kind of safe. We've thought about it about physical safety, about not getting injured on the job, right? But her brilliance was that we really need to be thinking about how people psychologically feel. So as I'm writing this, and I'm realizing everything that I've found to be true about human nature and what inspires people to do their greatest work is emotional. It's not here, it's here. So in the book, I said, not thinking that I was ever going to ask Amy Edmondson for a testimonial. I'm just writing the book as I knew to write it. I said, we really should be calling it psychological and emotional safety, because it's an emotional feeling. It's not a psychological thought that makes people say, I feel psychologically safe, right? So I sent her the book, and she gave me the endorsement and never came back and said, why are you challenging my work? So so I think she's on board with that as well, is that it's mind and heart. It's not all mind and it's not all heart.
Well, it's interesting, and thinking the parallels between you and Amy is you are a finance guy originally, and Amy began her career as an engineer. So two disciplines where one doesn't associate immediately with the heart. But of course, there's great logic to both of those disciplines. And so your combination makes it more compelling. And so let's flip into where we are right now, because you have been, and I encourage people to follow you on Twitter, because you've got some great stuff. You create great dialogue, and you're talking about the future of work and hybrid and stuff. But one of the things you talk about is ever lower levels of engagement. So what do we do about that, Mark? So
the premise to your question, John, is that we have a report card on how well we manage people, and it's Gallup's engagement study. And there are other organizations that do them, and the numbers vary, but they're pretty central, indicating that basically a third or less of people in America, and substantially lower number outside of America, are willing to do, what they use discretionary effort. They're willing to go above and beyond. So that kind of tells you something, because every manager wants to have people that will do anything that you need them to do. And basically 2/3 of people are putting their hand up and saying that I'm not willing to do that. So if that's the case, then we're not managing effectively. We're not managing successfully. The grades are in, the class is over and you failed. And so it's like, okay, so if I'm going to take that test again, if I'm going to go back and take that class because I needed to graduate, what do I have to do differently? And what we have to do differently is to realize that going back and trying to do it the same way you did it the first time isn't going to work. So I really think it's like you take the whiteboard and you erase it and you start all over. Now, this is controversial, but I'm going to say that not everybody should be a manager that is a manager today.
You get no pushback from me.
I didn't think so. But, somebody listening to this.
You're actually looking at one right now.
But it starts with, for different reasons perhaps, John, but it starts with the foundational idea, which is, do you love other people? Like, do you thrive in seeing other people succeed? Do you want to help other people become something? Because we know there's research that shows that like 2/3 of people are just perfectly happy focusing on themselves. And that's not a bad thing. They're focused on their careers. They'll make a contribution, but they don't really think about, how do I help other people along? So it starts there. We need to say, that's the threshold. So prove to me that you really truly care about the success, growth, and well-being of other people, and then we'll have a discussion as to whether or not you have enough skills to do that. So if we were to weed out the people that just don't, then you know what? I'm okay. That's not what I want to do. Let me go back to being an individual contributor, find something successful for me so that I don't have to do that. That would be very helpful. But it really comes down to understanding that, and by the way, there is research that shows that the most effective teachers do two things. They care individually about their people, and they set very high expectations. So if you were to go up to somebody and say, well, you work for Mark Crowley, what's one word that you would use to describe him? You would say, well, he's the heart guy. So they're all going to say heart, heart, heart. And they would say demanding, demanding, demanding. So when you're supporting people with their needs and you're making them thrive and marinate in all those positive emotions, people are feeling so good. They're growing, they're thriving, they're being rewarded, they're being appreciated, they feel safe, they know they trust the person they're working for. All of a sudden, those people are doing extraordinary work. So it dawned on me one day that, wait a minute, if we're going to do good work and I'm going to make this investment in you, then we should be setting our bars a lot higher. We should be setting higher expectations for ourselves because we're like on it. And so I think that's one of the other selling points of all this, is that when you do that for people the way that I did it in my career and then refine my understanding of it, is that you can really achieve something extraordinary, which is why I know all of my teams did amazing things, because we always started off with expectations that were much higher than anybody else was setting, because we knew we could believe it. We knew we could actually achieve them.
Well, okay, I'm going to call you on this for a second, because when you said others would describe you as demanding, how does demanding complement or does it conflict with heart? What's that connection, Mark? So yeah, you're
not. You're asking a really good question. You're not challenging it. I think it's really what it comes down to is understanding that the job of a manager is to get performance, right? The company gives you goals. Your job is to make sure your team achieves what it's supposed to achieve, and ideally something better than what you're being asked to achieve, right? So if you align rewards, if somebody is going to go above and beyond for you and achieve at a level that isn't even as above the bar of what expectations are, then there needs to be something in it for them. So what I found, it was helping them get promotions, making sure that they got rewards financially, making sure that they got recognized within the organization, making sure that they contributed to my team in unique ways. So you would take somebody who's a high performer and let them help you interview new people for the team, giving them special projects to help them grow and develop. So this wasn't me taking from people in the sense that I was demanding. It's really the sense of I'm helping people thrive on such a deep human level that they became capable of doing more. And so by pointing that out to people would, oh, you're actually right. Like I now believe in myself. I know you believe in me. I know I have the right tools and I have the right support. So let's go for it.
Absolutely. What you've done is you've given them a foundation. You said, I said, I believe in you. Now let's go do it. And you said the key point there, which is sometimes overlooked, is I gave them the tools and the resources. Because how often do we hear managers say, go do this? And where's my resources? Where's my support? Oh, figure it out. So that's very important. So that's very much considering the heart as part of management. So you have another phrase that intrigued me called emotional currency. What does that mean, Mark?
So there's research that shows, John, that, as I mentioned a minute ago, that human beings are hardwired to thrive on positive emotions. And we know that the sort of the bare minimum for people to thrive is a ratio of 4-to-1 positive emotions. So life gives you negative, and this is true in relationships too, where a researcher named John Gottman at the University of Washington proved that successful marriages endure because there's a 5-to-1 ratio. But in a workplace, if you can create an environment where people are experiencing 4 positive emotions for every negative one, you're putting them into optimal level of performance. And so once I understood that, and then there's another component of this, which research in the book shows that, and this has been reconfirmed now for probably the last at least 10 years, that pay is important to people. But once people feel that they're being paid fairly and even generously, it stops being a motivator of their performance. Like, okay,
that's also a bedrock concept in motivation.
But it's really hard for managers to do it. Even in the Great Resignation, there's this idea that, hey, we're going to lose this guy, so give him a 10% raise and that'll keep him. And that's why are people continuing to leave if that was a solution? It's not, even though people want the 10%.
I want to stop again for that, because you talked about the 4-to-1 ratio. Define that in terms of, do I give you 4 attaboys for every corrective or every critique?
No.
What does it mean, Mark?
That's a very good question. It's not that rudimentary in the sense that, John, you're a good guy. John, I'm really glad I hired you. John, good work. Now go take out the trash, right? It's really about the feelings. So my fundamental thesis is that feelings and emotions drive human behavior. We think we're rational beings and we're not, right? So if you understand that, and you understand that we thrive on positive emotions, then emotional currency is paying people literally, paying people in a way that ensures that they experience those positive emotions. So how do you do that? Well, you do it by appreciation, by acknowledging that people are doing good work and praising people in public. But it's also, if you read an article over the weekend and I say, John Baldoni would love this, so I send it to you, right? Now, wait a minute, my boss thinks about me over the weekend, thinks about me personally. Like even if I sent you, let's say, a relative of yours is struggling with some sort of a disease and I see an article and you're like, wow, like it's not even work related. It's about me personally. That creates a positive emotion. If I say to you, John, I want you to go to this class. We're going to pay for you to go to this class because we want to invest in you because we see your potential. That creates a feeling like, wow, Mark cares about me that much. So it's not this, you're a good guy, you're a good guy, you're a good guy. It's behaving in a way that demonstrates to people that you genuinely care about them.
Well, we might say something, you treat others with dignity and respect. So
start there. I mean, that creates a feeling. I feel respected, right? That means John cares about me. That's how it works.
Now, you say something that makes me question it because, and we're probably on the same wavelength, but I want you to define it. You say traditional leadership practices are failing. What did you mean by that, Mark? So,
traditional leadership theory is simply pay people as little as possible and squeeze as much out of them as possible. Yeah. And so we think that's draconian and crazy, but that's how it works. This is how it works, And so, and it also, starts with an idea that people are easily replaceable and expendable. So if we get into trouble, we're just going to let you go, right? We saw the crying CEO the other day and let 2 people go. Right. And was taking it on like, boy, this hurt me. But there are other CEOs who would say, how do I make it so it doesn't hurt them? How do I make it so like maybe everybody takes a 10% pay cut for the next 6 months to help the company, right? We're all going to stay all for one for all, as opposed to letting 2 people go. Or foregoing some part of his compensation. Or, by the way, just accepting that you might have a bad quarter, but long term, these people are really talented and are going to get us where we need to. So it's a broader understanding of the value of people.
Right. And I think that's very important. And I know I don't know that it's in the book yet, but it's something that you write about and certainly put out on Twitter. And it's with the possibility of layoffs, make that the last resort. So how would talk about leading from the heart and how it plays off on layoffs, Mark?
So I believe that a layoff is a tourniquet. And you use a tourniquet when you're injured and you could possibly die, then you have to put the tourniquet on knowing you're going to lose a limb, right? So am I willing to give up my arm or my leg to stay alive? Then if that's where the company is, then you have no choice. Then you have to let people go. But there's a story in the book about the CEO of a company called SAS. It's a $3 billion, 42-year-old company. And the CEO in the Great Recession, they went away for Christmas in, I guess, 2007. They took a week off, closed the operations, and came back. And he's walking around and he's seeing people like ducking him and looking away when he was around. And he was like, what's going on with people? So they said, well, some of our big competitors just let 10,000 people go in order to survive the Great Recession. And they're on LinkedIn and writing their resumes and they're, trying to interview for jobs because they know you're going to lay them off. And he goes, I'm not going to lay anybody off. So he had a global conference call and he said, look, he says, I know everybody's afraid. You think I'm going to let you all go? And he goes, I'm not. What I need you to do is to innovate as much as you can, come up with new products, help this company succeed for the long term, and watch your expenses. Keep costs down. That's all I ask you. And he told me, I went and visited him in Cary, North Carolina, and he said, the minute I did this, he goes, people were crying. Like, you're going to keep me when the company's going down? And he's like, yeah, of course I'm going to keep you because this is a company that I don't want to lose you. So I'm willing to forego, a downturn for a quarter or even a year in order to get where we need to get to. So guess what? They ended up having the same amount of revenue that they always had. Somehow things worked out. And then what happened was all those companies that let people go, it was so disruptive to the organization that SAS created incredible innovations, these new products that came out after the recession that was over that propelled them. So, it's a choice that people make, but we're in this environment even now where CEOs feel deferential to shareholders. And if they feel they're not going to meet the number, they let people go. And what they don't understand is it's not just the people you're letting go that you're harming. You've destroyed all sense of psychological, emotional safety and trust. Because if I stick around and you just got let go, I'm like, hey, as soon as they have a bigger problem, I'm going to be the next one out of here. So am I going to work really hard for this company? No, and so engagement stops and they think, okay, everybody back to work now. And it doesn't work like that. People are like, just never going to be the same.
Well, that example of SaaS is a classic example of leading from the heart and the benefits that it delivers. And that's a good thing to keep in mind as we face the challenges that we're facing right now. Mark, we are racing along here, and we could go on for another hour or so, but all good things must come to an end. So I want you to share a story of grace, as I ask all our guests to do. So have at it.
All right. So, as I'm writing my book and I'm trying to confirm that there was indeed science to confirm what I believe to be true, I wrote a whole bunch of cardiologists where I live in San Diego County, and none of them responded to me at all. And I got depressed, very discouraged. Like, I'm not going to get the confirmation because I wrote enough of them and not one of them responded to me. When I was an executive at my former organization, they purchased a very large life insurance policy on me. So they got half and I got half, but they paid for it. Well, that was eliminated when I left. So I had to replace it. My brother-in-law owns an insurance agency. And so he sent a nurse to the house and they did all the blood tests and all that. And he called me up one day and he said, I'm not bullshitting you. You have a serious heart problem. And they diagnosed this when they came out to you, and you need to get to the doctor like today. And so I started thinking about that, John, and I'd run the New York City Marathon a couple of times and, generally keep myself in good health. And I was like,
hey, it happened to me. So.
Did it? Well, I just didn't think it was true,
Yeah.
So I went to, and now it turns out my doctor has retired. So I've got a brand new doctor. And so I go in and I tell him what happened. And he goes, oh, well, I've got an EKG machine right here. Let's just run it again. So he runs it again. And he says, good news, you have nothing wrong with your heart. He goes, actually, your heart's in better shape than it should be for your age. They misinterpreted the whole thing. I'll write the insurance company and you'll get the life insurance policy. So I'm like, phew, thank goodness. So then he says, well, I'm your new doctor and I need to ask some questions. Like, what do you do for a living? And I just blurted out. I went, hey, do you know any cardiologists? Because I'm writing a book and I really would love some help. And so he goes, well, who'd you write to? So I gave him Dr. A, B, and C. He goes, Dr. A, he says, he's in Europe. He's not around. So no surprise. And he goes, Dr. B, well, he's just a complete asshole. So you're never going to hear from him. And he goes, and Dr. C is just really shy. So he goes, no surprise you didn't hear from any of those people. He goes, but have you heard of Dr. Mimi Ganeri? And I said, no. And he said, she's here. She's a physician here. She's a cardiosurgeon here. And she just wrote a book that I think you might find interesting. Somehow I think there's a connection there. So I went to the bookstore, got her book, read the first 150 pages of it, John. Nothing at all related to what I was talking about. And I'm thinking, do I finish this? So I keep going. I got to page 156 and all of a sudden there it was. We're just discovering that the heart and the mind are working together and all that we've discussed. So I wrote her a letter, asked her if I could meet her. And I walked into her office and she said, Mr. Crowley, you figured out something we're just figuring out in science ourselves. And I will tell you on this audience, I just had tears coming down my eyes because it was completely confirming of a whole life's work and a whole philosophy that there was no evidence of until then. So that's my example of grace.
Great. That's what charming story that begins with a health scare that ends up into wonderful flowering of leadership, and a terrific book now out in the second edition, Leading from the Heart. Mark, how can people find you?
Well, let me show you. So I'm proud of this. This is the, I'm looking over here. How's that? That's the book. It's available now, of course, but it comes out on Tuesday. And you can find me. All roads lead to markccrowley.com. Don't forget the C in the middle. But you can find me there, and that'll link you to LinkedIn and Twitter and my podcast, and obviously the book.
Great. Mark, it's been a pleasure to have you on today. Thank you for making time for us. And with that, we will go out.
Thank you, John. It's a great experience.